This video was created specifically for Etsy sellers who engage with production partners. Etsy sellers are responsible for adhering to Etsy's marketplace policies, including the ethical expectations for working with production partners policy. This video provides information to introduce sellers to key topics addressed in the policy and support sellers in choosing ethical and responsible production partners. Child labor is one of the most critical topics related to international labor compliance and ethical production practices. In this video, you will learn how to define a child, child labor, and young worker, the legal rights of children and why the protection of children is important, the best practices related to child labor and protections for any young workers, examples of the most common risks of child labor and suggested remediation, questions to ask your production partners about their practices related to child labor. Sellers should familiarize themselves with the concepts you will learn in this video so that you can ask production partners about their working conditions before entering into a relationship. NEST's guidance around child labor protection was developed based on the International Labor Organization's International Labor Standards on Child Labor and the United Nations Convention on Child Rights, while applying NEST's experience and understanding of artisan production supply chains. According to the International Labor Organization, or ILO, a child is anyone who is under the age of 18. The UN Convention on Child Rights was established to protect children from exploitation and harmful activities. Child labor can have a long-term impact on children, limiting their access to education, hindering their natural development, or preventing them from engaging in better opportunities. The convention centers around the framework that all children have rights, specifically the right to survival, development, participation, and protection. A child has the right to life and the most basic needs for their existence, including living in a safe and clean environment and sufficient food, drinking water, and medical care. Children have the right to have what they need to reach their fullest potential, including access to education, planning, leisure, and cultural activities, should complete compulsory education, and have enough time to study, play, and sleep. Children have a right to take an active role in their communities and nations, including the freedom to express opinions and to be heard and respected. And, lastly, children should be protected against all forms of abuse, neglect, and exploitation and, if working, protected from hazardous work, overtime, or night shifts. So what is child labor? The term child labor refers to any work that deprives children of their childhood, their potential and their dignity, and is harmful to their physical and mental development. Child labor is any work that is mentally, physically, socially, or morally dangerous and harmful to children, exposes children to any hazardous process or materials, engages children under the minimum hiring age in any form of economic activity for more than 1 hour per week, deprives children of the opportunity to attend school or forces children to leave school early, and requires children to combine school attendance with excessively long and heavy work. Not all work performed by children is considered child labor. Young workers are any workers who are under the age of 18 but above the local minimum hiring age. Young workers may engage in production, however, since they are still developing physically and mentally, it is important that protections are put in place to prevent the exploitation of these workers. These protections for young workers include mandatory school attendance. All young workers must attend school at least until the mandatory schooling age, which varies by geography. This ensures that young workers are provided with the necessary opportunities for education and learning. Limits of working hours. To ensure that young workers have the time needed for developmental activities, such as homework, play, and sleep, the work hours of young workers must be limited following local labor law requirements. Production partners should familiarize themselves with the local regulations, though generally, young workers should not work during school hours if they are still of mandatory schooling age. And they should not exceed the legally required maximum number of hours per day of combined time between work and school. If a young worker is not currently in school and not of mandatory enrollment age, they should not work more than the legally required maximum number of hours per week. They should not work at night between the hours of 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., and they should have a rest period of less than the legally required minimum number of consecutive hours between two working periods. Lastly, young workers should be restricted from doing hazardous work. Hazardous processes, such as open flames, chemicals, and sharp objects, pose a risk to young workers who are still developing physically. Any young worker engaged in production should be restricted from carrying out any hazardous processes until they are at least 18 years of age. Artisan and craft work can be carried out within informal production locations, such as homes and small workshops. Within these contexts, risks of child labor may exist and may differ from traditional factory production locations. It is important to understand the policies and practices of production partners with respect to child labor so you can avoid working with production partners who do not meet international standards. Effective child labor policies include strong systems and practices for preventing, monitoring, and remediating cases of child labor throughout the supply chain. Production partners should have systems in place that guard against child labor. This system has three main components. The first is prevention. The most effective way to ensure there is no child labor is to prevent it from happening in the first place. The steps production partners should be expected to take include: having a written child labor policy documents a business commitment to protecting children and outlines its practices related to preventing and remediating child labor. Setting a minimum hiring age. NEST recommends a minimum hiring age of no less than 15 years or the minimum age set by local labor law, whichever is higher. Collecting age verification. Before workers are hired or begin production, a form of identification should be used to verify that they are above the minimum age, and a copy of the identification should be kept on file. Posting signs restricting children from entering workshop spaces or providing safe areas for children to prevent exposure to production areas. If young workers are engaged, signs preventing access to areas where hazardous processes are used should be posted. And, to communicate these practices, regular training of workers so that they are aware of the actions the production partner has taken against child labor. Once production partners have preventative practices in place, it is important that they are monitored. Production partners should regularly check that the systems to guard against are implemented properly and that there are no indications of child labor. Lastly, if child labor is found, the production partner should be prepared to remediate the situation quickly and effectively without any harm to the child. The following scenarios are examples of child labor risks that are most frequently seen in craft supply chains and suggestions for how a production partner can be remediated. When speaking with production partners about their practices, sellers should take note of any potential risks that may be present. In this first example, a worker is hired over a summer school break to help with production in a workshop, but they did not have their identification available when they started production. No matter how old a worker looks, their age verification should be reviewed and a copy should be kept on file before they are permitted to work. Example 2. A young worker is hired to work in a small workshop where textiles are being dyed with open flames and chemicals, and the worker is asked to help with the dyeing process. Young workers should not work with any hazardous production processes until they are at least 18 years old. When you work with a production partner, sellers should ensure that production partners comply with all applicable local employment laws, including those related to child labor. Even though you may not be able to visit your production partner's facilities physically, these questions will help you better understand their practices regarding child labor and whether they are aligned with ETSI's ethical expectations. Do you have a child labor policy or systems for preventing, monitoring, or remediating child labor? You can ask the production partner to share their policy on child labor. Do you have a minimum hiring age? You can ask the production partner to share their minimum hiring age and any documentation that includes this minimum age. Do you confirm workers' age before they begin production? Do you keep a copy of this verification on file? Do you conduct training related to child labor? You can ask the production partner to share information about their practices for training about child labor. If you were to find children under the minimum hiring age working, can you share what systems you have to remediate the situation? We hope the concepts you learned in this video will help you evaluate potential partners and choose ethical and responsible production partners.